I knew that if weather came that I was going to try to incorporate it. I didn't realize that it was in such a big scale, so I was only thinking, I gotta shoot tomorrow.
Why was this scene, filmed during a literal typhoon, the only one that Coppola left out of the final cut? I'll tell you the story behind this scene in this episode of Making Apocalypse Now.
Hey, don't leave without me!
It's extreme prejudice. Are you an assassin? A soldier?
Today's sponsor, Mubi, sent me this strange black box in the mail. Watch to the end of the video to find out what's inside. After the Playboy scene, the patrol boat arrives at a Medevac area to check why there was no response when Chief radioed after seeing a crashed helicopter. Willard leaves the boat to take a look around, while the rest of the crew sees if they can figure out an issue with the boat's engine. This is another example of the story mirroring what was actually going on in the production. On the day that real concert promoter Bill Graham and the Playboy Bunnies arrived to shoot the Playboy sequence, there was a problem with the patrol boats. The boats just couldn't go fast enough. They even tried having the boat towed and tried hiding a small boat on the side to push it along. The big Playboy Bunny show and the Medevac scenes didn't require the boat, so they could be filmed, but afterward, the production would have to shut down to find new patrol boats to use. Remember, Coppola had all of his own money wrapped up in this production, and any delay would be costly because they would have to keep paying everybody and renting offices, hotel rooms, and equipment during the hiatus. Coppola called assistant director Jerry Zeismer over, this guy,
with extreme prejudice,
and asked him what he should do. Zeismer responded that they should do the Medevac scene, then the Playboy show, then shut down and get 2 more patrol boats from Thailand. Coppola reluctantly agreed, but things were about to get even more complicated. It was mid-May of 1976, and assistant director Jerry Zeismer and second assistant director Larry Franco were eating in their hotel's dining room in the city of Olongapo. The rain was beating down outside when production manager Leon Chuluk came by their table to tell them that the weather report said a typhoon was headed their way. This account is from Jerry Zeismer's fantastic book, which you can find a link to in the description. You might remember way back in episode 3 when Coppola was looking for a location to shoot in, and he was choosing between Australia and the Philippines. Australia would be a way easier place to shoot in, but the Philippines would look much more authentic. Both the location scout and Coppola's mentor Roger Corman warned Coppola against filming in the Philippines because typhoon season starts on May 15th, and Coppola defiantly said that he would just film in the rain. Well, now those chickens were coming home to roost. On May 19th, 1976, Typhoon Olga hit the Philippines. It would be the worst typhoon to hit the Philippines in 40 years. Now, because this is a series on Apocalypse Now, we will be focusing on how the typhoon affected the production, but everything I'm going to talk about in regards to the movie is nothing compared to how devastating it was for the citizens of the Philippines. The typhoon would kill 140 Filipinos and leave thousands without homes. Production manager Leon Chuluk tried to call Coppola in Manila, but the phones were down. By the next morning, the rain was even worse. The news report said that the typhoon was hitting hard a little north of them in Iba, where some of the crew were setting up for the Playboy scenes. Suddenly, the 3 men heard the sound of a helicopter attempting to land on the roof of the hotel. It was Jet Ranger and badass technical advisor Dick White, this guy. That's right, Dick White flew a helicopter through part of a typhoon. Things weren't as bad at the hotel, but it lost electricity and water, which was a nightmare because without air conditioning, the rooms were, quote, like saunas with mosquitoes. Most of the production crew in the hotel would stay in the swimming pool for much of the night. By the time Coppola arrived, they had decided to fly to Iba at sunrise to assess the damage to the sets. When Dick White flew them up to Iba, they found, quote, production designer Dean Tavoularis and others down to their last cans of food, and reluctant to drink water that was most likely contaminated by sewage. In something kind of similar to the scene, Tavoularis had been trapped in a house with Playmate of the Year Cindy Wood. Tavoularis said, "She didn't want to live in a hotel, so I took her to this little basement room and told her there was just one room because 3 or 4 of us were already crammed into the place. We sat around and it started raining harder and harder until finally it was literally white outside and the trees were bent 45 degrees. What's interesting is that one of the people sheltering with them was New York Times writer Jonathan Reynolds, who later wrote a successful play called Geniuses about his experiences that night. Geniuses is a satire about filmmakers working on a war epic who are trapped in a shack during a storm with the producer's hot bimbo girlfriend.
It started out just it was raining a lot, and after a while we realized it was knocking out centers of civilizations, and rivers were overrunning, and people couldn't get to the places, or they were all on the roofs of hotels and stuff. And then we had to stop for a while. And I realized that certain sets had been destroyed.
The set for the Playboy show scene was completely destroyed, so they flew north to the Medevac set. The tents had blown over and there was water and mud everywhere. Coppola said, "They had rain and mud in Vietnam. Can we film there?" The sets being built in Baylor had also been destroyed, and lots of equipment was either damaged beyond repair or lost. The roads were flooded, and water made its way into the buildings, including the house that the Coppolas were living in.
Water has started coming in the rooms downstairs, and Sophia is splashing around in it. Francis has decided to make pasta, and he's turned on La Boheme full volume.
Crew members were getting the stomach flu left and right. Producer Gray Fredrickson said, "It was a nightmare. We were stranded in that horrible hotel in Subic Bay that was mildewing from water everywhere." 2 days later, on May 21st, the rain was still going. Eleanor Coppola flew up to Iba to the new base of operations close to the Medevac set. She wrote, "The weather report says winds of 60 miles per hour are expected. I can hear directions going over the walkie-talkies to tie everything down. The rain has really started. I can see across the open yard where the trucks are parked. It's a gray-white wall of water. The wardrobe man is on the radio. The tents, where he has costumes for 800 extras, are blowing away." The next day, Eleanor Coppola wrote, "I'm in a tent sitting on an operating table. It is raining off and on. It is cool, thank God. I can hear the pumps pumping river water to flood the area around the tents. The road is out. Everyone walked out of here through the mud. Most of the local people are barefoot. I sank into the mud and my sandals just stuck there. A guy had to pull me out. It's tea time here in the tent. The Italian crew is talking and sipping espresso." Later, at 5 p.m., she continues, "The wind is getting stronger. Stuff is sliding across the floor. Some young extras are standing near me. They are talking about their GI haircuts, how long it would take to grow, about blackjack, about the money they get, how it's $25 a day and they haven't done anything, just wait around. 300 extras went back on buses today." After 3 days of heavy rain, Coppola asked the U.S. Department of Defense again for some help, seeing as there was a nearby U.S. Navy base at Subic Bay, but they refused. The production was about to be shut down because of the patrol boats anyway, but now the sets were destroyed. Zeismer reminded Coppola that their insurance would probably cover natural disasters, and disaster it was. Frederick Forrest said, "Bill Graham had just arrived, I think with the Playboy bunnies. We're making conversation, we don't want to tell them how horrible it is, you know, so we're trying to be polite and have drinks, and he says, 'Do you always have these strong winds?' We said, 'Well, this is a little stronger today.' Phew, a fucking tree would go flying by the window." Graham would end up flipping out when he discovered that there was no way to make a phone call to the States from any of the production locations. He ended up having to travel to the outskirts of Manila to a telephone pole that had been tented in order to contact his office in LA. Aside from a helicopter being fully blown over, the generator truck was half underwater, the dolly track was buried in 4 feet of mud, and the river rose and washed away piles of supplies near the dock. After sorting out the issues with the production equipment, Coppola basically decided to mostly leave the look of the Medevac area as is. Maybe they should add Typhoon Olga as an uncredited art director on IMDb. Coppola had the idea to have the patrol boat dock and find Bill Graham and the bunnies in one of the tents, and they wouldn't need the boat's engine to work for it to convincingly dock. Of course, figuring out the logistics for getting all the cast, crew, and equipment to the battered location was not easy. And once they got to the location, in order to actually get to the set, the crew had to get out of the trucks and trek through 200 yards of knee-high mud, and some of them even had to carry the actresses playing the bunnies. Most of the crew got these terrible rashes from all the mud and rain. The patrol boat itself had taken 12 hours to get to the location, and the Typhoon had picked it up and threw it into the first line of tents.
We went to Iba to shoot the scene that got cut. The set was like 80% demolished. It's like mud up to the knees. I mean, it was like pissing, man. I mean, it was hitting you so hard it hurt.
On Wednesday, May 26th, Eleanor Coppola wrote, "They are shooting the Medevac set tomorrow after all. A helicopter got through and took Francis and the camera crew to the set at Iba. Francis wants rain for the Medevac scene, so now they are hoping that it continues through tomorrow. Mona started to tell me about the insurance adjuster coming in from Singapore to assess the typhoon damage. They would finally shoot the Medevac scene Friday and Saturday. You can see that it's really raining in the scene because they wouldn't be able to get rain towers that far away in the wide shots. Unfortunately, the script supervisor's master script with drawings and notes for the editors literally disintegrated in all the rain. It had stopped raining around lunchtime, so they filmed the part in the tent with some fake rain outside the windows and doors. On the last day of filming the Medevac scene, there was no rain at all, so they pumped the river to make some fake rain. So this scene was left out of the theatrical version and put back in for the Redux version, and then was the only scene from the Redux version to be removed again for the final cut. This gives us a fascinating opportunity to really study a scene by one of cinema's greatest directors in one of his best movies that was ultimately deemed unworthy. We never got anything like that with Kubrick. Usually when you see a deleted scene as a special feature on a Blu-ray, it's an assembly cut of the dailies. But here we get a unique view of a deleted scene that has been printed and fully carried out creatively. We'll get another opportunity like this with a scene that was initially cut but ultimately kept in the final cut, the French plantation sequence. But let's see if we can figure out why Coppola felt that the Medevac scene ultimately doesn't deserve to be in the movie. First, and possibly the most important factor, is that the scene was never fully finished. Of the 3 Playboy bunnies that appear in the movie, we only get 2 vignettes in this scene. Because of the typhoon and the looming hiatus, they weren't able to shoot the 3rd vignette. Second, in my opinion, the purpose of the scene just doesn't read to the audience as Coppola had intended. The plot of the scene is that Willard trades fuel to Bill Graham for the patrol boat crew to have sex with the bunnies, so that Graham and the bunnies can evacuate, and Willard can endear himself to the crew who he's beginning to sympathize with.
I negotiated 2 barrels of fuel for a couple of hours with the bunnies.
The bunnies are in a desperate situation being stuck in Vietnam in an area that has been decimated by the weather, and we are under the assumption that it wasn't even something the bunnies came up with, and everyone is taking advantage of the women. The scene doesn't appear in John Milius's 1969 draft of the script, but it is in the 1975 Coppola rewrite. I'm assuming this was still written by Milius based on his interview, and that Coppola ended up changing it quite a bit. This version of the scene also seems very Milius. In the written scene, we get to see the exchange between Bill Graham and Willard. Graham explains that the military commandeered their helicopter to evacuate soldiers and brought it back without enough fuel. They have been stranded for 2 days. Graham begs Willard for fuel because they're in a dangerous situation being so close to combat, but Willard refuses. One of the bunnies implies she'd do stuff with Willard in exchange for fuel. Willard says he'll only do it for all the bunnies and his crew. Graham is disgusted and almost throws Willard out, but at the last second, he negotiates 2 full drums of fuel for time with all 3 bunnies. Also, in the script, Miss December just wants to get it over with. The woman with Lance is pleased, and it's implied that Clean gets a turn. Willard has sex with a 3rd woman who throws a shoe at him when he's leaving. It was normal for scenes to change substantially during production. Coppola would often change around Milius's scenes during shooting, and he was constantly writing on location. Because Coppola's unique process was complicated by the weather, the vignettes of the scene weren't really worked out beforehand. Coppola decided to base the vignettes on the actresses themselves. You'll remember from the previous episode that 2 of the bunnies were real Playboy models, and one, Colleen Camp, was an actress.
Wait, how come you got a bird?
I used to be the bird girl at Busch Gardens.
This was actually true. Camp had worked with the birds at the amusement park Busch Gardens, and so Coppola incorporated it into the scene.
Now, if you were a macaw, would you want a better place to sit?
There's sort of a character arc here where Chef is obsessed with her centerfold, and now his fantasies are coming true. He tries to dress her up like she was in the centerfold. This is sort of a reference to a famous joke about Raquel Welch. I've mentioned her in the past 2 episodes, and now it's coming full circle. Here's a shortened version of the joke. A man washes up on a deserted island after the cruise ship he was on sinks. Somehow the only other survivor is the beautiful Raquel Welch. After a few weeks of surviving together and eating coconuts and tropical fruits, the 2 get lonely and decide to, get busy. The man can't believe his luck. After a week of this, the man asks Welch for a favor and she smiles suggestively. He brings out a man's suit that has recently washed ashore, and he asks her to put it on. Welch thinks that it's strange, but she puts on the suit and says, "Now what?" He asks, "Could you put on this man's hat?" She does. He says, "Finally, would it be alright if I called you Bill?" She rolls her eyes and says, "Whatever." The man then slaps Welch on the shoulder and says, "Hey Bill, you wouldn't believe who I had sex with last week." I have to mention that between the release of the previous episode and this one, Raquel Welch sadly passed away. She was such an important part of American pop culture, and I love the episode of Seinfeld she's in. But the point of this in the Chef vignette is that Chef is getting sidetracked by having her dress up to look like the centerfold because it's more about the story of having had been with her than actually being with her.
Would you just, mind putting this black wig on for me, please? I can't believe it. Me, Jay Hicks. I can't believe I'm really here, you know?
I have to say too that it's strange that she seems totally fine with being pimped out. The other vignette involves Lance and Cindy Wood. Wood was a real Playboy model and had told Coppola about her life and issues being a pinup. Coppola wanted to use this vignette to show the parallel between how young women's bodies are exploited for sex, just as we are seeing how these young men's bodies are being exploited for war. But the people who we are supposed to like are the ones who are doing the exploiting. There's also the aspect of Lance's backstory of being rejected by his high school crush, joining the military because of it, getting drunk and yelling at the bunnies, "You fucking bitch!" and finally finding himself alone with one. The third vignette was supposed to be Willard getting a tarot card reading from the third bunny. While telling his fortune, she would pretty much say what was going to happen in the last third of the movie, but I couldn't find any info on the specifics. In the editing room, the movie was just getting too long. Cuts needed to be made, and this scene got removed. Screenwriter John Milius was glad that the scene was cut, because he didn't really like it, and he had forgotten one important thing. If the previous scene set up the Playboy bunnies to be an allegory for the sirens in Homer's The Odyssey, the men are not supposed to be able to touch them.
And some of the stuff that you think that was great when you first wrote it, you sit there and go, oh my God, how did I ever do that?
However, Coppola thought the scene added to the overall surreal feeling of the movie, and for Redux he put it back in to make the movie even more bizarre. But when he watched through the Redux version in 2000, he realized that the scene wasn't really that bizarre at all.
What about you, fella?
Personally, I kind of like the scene. It doesn't drag as much as the French plantation scene. The atmosphere is also really interesting. I love the kind of cozy hangout feeling of the helicopter with the rain outside, and I've always felt that the longer it takes to get to Kurtz just makes the arrival more impactful. That said, I can see why it was cut. The trading fuel for sex just makes the characters feel gross. It would be interesting to see a version of the scene where they're just hanging out with the bunnies and they start to hit it off. Willard could endear himself to the crew by allowing them to stay a while before moving on, and it would be cool to see the tarot card vignette added. It was a real relief when this and the Playboy scenes were over, because as miserable as they were to shoot, they also knew that the production was going on hiatus directly afterward for at least a month, so almost everyone would be able to go back home to the US or Italy for a much needed break. But before they could leave, Coppola, the script supervisor, and several other crew members would soon wind up in the hospital because the water they had pumped from the river to make the fake rain for the final day of shooting was heavily polluted. Coppola said he lost around 20 pounds in a few days from malnutrition and dehydration, and Eleanor got down to 89 pounds. Jerry Zeismer visited Coppola in the hospital. Zeismer was exhausted and very relieved to be going back to the States, but Coppola asked him to stay behind and oversee the set reconstruction for 6 to 8 weeks. Then it would be another 10 weeks of shooting. Of course, in reality, it wound up taking a lot longer than that. And about half of the crew weren't able to come back to the Philippines because of weight loss and exhaustion. The Typhoon would cost the production $2 million and delay the production 6 weeks. The good news is that the insurance paid for most of the rebuilding costs, the costs of getting the new patrol boat, and moving the crew to the new shooting location. Zeismer writes that the Typhoon probably saved the production. It was actually the largest payout the insurance company had made besides a Julie Andrews box office bomb titled Star. In total, the payout was $1,185,000. But get this, by the time the hiatus started, they had 90 hours worth of footage shot, and another year would be spent on just the filming. On June 2nd, associate producer Mona Skagger sent this memo to the crew. Effective Saturday, June 5th, 1976, all staff and crew who are not off the payroll as the above date will officially be considered off the Coppola Cinema 7 payroll. If you feel that your services are necessary during the hiatus period, please talk to your department head and the production department. We wish to thank you for the tremendous effort you have given thus far, and we look forward to seeing you again. Much of the crew would fly out while it was still storming. On one flight, just after takeoff, the plane lurched and plunged about 20 feet. It was enough to even scare stuntman Terry Leonard. This guy. On June 8th, the Coppolas flew home tourist class on Philippine Airlines. During the 6-week hiatus, workers in the Philippines under production designer Dean Tavares' supervision would not just build new sets, but create infrastructure around a location in Pak San Han that operated almost like a small city. Just another example of the production mirroring America's involvement in Vietnam, invading areas and creating little civilizations that could be easily torn down and abandoned when no longer needed. For the 4th of July, which happened to be the bicentennial, Cavaliers had 20 pounds of hot dogs and buns shipped to the location, along with famous Amos cookies. The food happened to arrive with 79 body bags they also ordered to decorate some of the locations. Back in the States, Coppola worked on the story. Screenwriter John Milius had him read up on Genghis Khan, saying, "Attila the Hun was a slob, but Genghis Khan was a great man." In July, Coppola negotiated more loans from United Artists, who agreed to an extra $3 million, but Coppola would have to repay the loans himself if the movie, quote, failed to gross $40 million or more. Coppola showed some footage to friends, but they didn't like it. They said they thought the acting was kind of tentative, which really depressed him. Eleanor Coppola wrote, "As I see, Francis has 90 hours of film, and no chunk can give you an idea of what 15 minutes worth of moments he is going to select from it. What you finally see on the screen does not give the slightest clue of what was left out. For someone to just look at an arbitrary piece is meaningless." Francis felt hopeless and scared. To make things worse, there were rumors in the press that the movie was out of control and out of money. Coppola traveled to Los Angeles to attend some more casting sessions with producer Fred Roos, and this is when they hired G.D. Spradlin and Harrison Ford for the Mission Briefing reshoots, and Dennis Hopper, though they weren't entirely sure what they were going to use him for. Coppola made new notes on the Willard character, writing that he was, quote, eccentric and that he seems to be able to be such a high-performance killer while he's clearly so dissipated and outspoken. Martin Sheen had gotten a bit spooked by the whole experience so far. He had already suffered some minor injuries, there was seemingly no end to the production in sight, and now he had experienced being hit by a powerful typhoon. He was also scared because he didn't know how to swim, and he was spending so much time on a boat in a river without a life jacket on. He spent the hiatus learning to swim and getting training in handling small weapons. With that said, when it was time to fly back to the Philippines, he went around saying goodbye to his friends, telling them, "I don't know if I'm going to live through this. Those fuckers are crazy. All those helicopters are really blowing things up." By July 25th, the Coppolas had returned to the Philippines to continue shooting. This time, the sets were built on higher ground. On the next episode of Making Apocalypse Now, the patrol boat crew have an encounter with a sampan and make their way up to the Do Lung Bridge. In this episode's companion PDF, you can read John Milius' original version of the scene, and I wrote my own treatment for a version of the scene that I think fits better with the overall story. You can buy it right now for $1 and it really helps the channel. Or join CinemaTyler on Patreon at the $5 level and get access to all the companion PDFs I've made for this series. Okay, now let's open this mysterious box from Mubi. Inside is a bunch of cool stuff for the new movie by Oldboy director Park Chan-wook called Decision to Leave, with lobby cards, a t-shirt, snacks, and a whole book of storyboards. The movie follows a detective who becomes obsessed with a woman who may have killed her husband. Everyone and their grandmother thought Decision to Leave was one of the best movies of the year, and you can watch it right now on Mubi. And speaking of Park Chan-wook, the newest issue of Mubi's biannual print magazine Notebook is out and features a fascinating photo essay by Park Chan-wook. It's really interesting to see him take the opposite approach to photography that he does in filmmaking. With these photos, he doesn't invent, instead, looking for the frame. This issue is titled We Traveled a Lot and features tons of interesting articles all involving cinema and travel. I really love this travel diary by Michelangelo Antonioni of his thoughts while working on a movie that would ultimately be shelved. You can find this issue in select stores, and subscriptions are now open for issues 3 and 4. It's only $40 for the year. That's 2 huge issues. And when you subscribe, each issue comes with an exclusive gift that will be shipped to you for free wherever you are. Find out more at mubi.com/magazine. Try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/CinemaTyler. That's mubi.com/CinemaTyler for a whole month of great cinema for free. Or join CinemaTyler on Patreon at the $5 level and get extended access to Mubi as a perk.